July 23, 1952, 2:17 a.m. The summer heat in Harlem wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. The kind of heat that made men angry, made tempers short, made violence feel inevitable. 19-year-old Leroy Nicky Barnes stood in the alley behind the Savoy Ballroom with a .38 revolver tucked into his waistband. His hands weren't shaking. That surprised him. He'd imagined this moment 100 times in the past week, and in every version his hands were trembling. But now that it was real, now that he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed, he felt nothing but cold clarity. Across the alley, smoking a cigarette under the flickering streetlight, stood Raymond Ray Tillman, 34 years old, neighborhood enforcer, numbers runner, and the man who'd made a fatal mistake 3 weeks ago. He'd put his hands on Nicky's mother. The streets of Harlem had rules, unwritten, but everyone knew them. You could hustle, you could steal, you could run your games and make your money, but you didn't touch another man's family. You didn't disrespect someone's mother, and you damn sure didn't slap a woman across the face in broad daylight on 125th Street while her son was in prison. Nicky had been locked up in Rikers for a petty theft charge when it happened. By the time he got out 2 weeks later, everyone knew the story. Ray had come to collect a debt Nicky's mother didn't owe, and when she told him her son would handle it when he got home, Ray had backhanded her so hard she hit the pavement. The debt was $47. Nicky had asked around, quietly, carefully. He'd learned everything about Ray's routine, where he ate, where he drank, who he ran with, and most importantly, when he was alone. Tonight, Ray was alone. But here's what makes this night different from every other street killing in 1952 Harlem. Here's why this moment mattered more than anyone could have predicted. Because standing in the shadows 20 feet behind Nicky, watching everything, was a man who would change his life forever. Bumpy Johnson. And what Bumpy did in the next 3 minutes would determine whether Nicky Barnes died in that alley as just another angry kid with a gun or lived to become the most powerful drug dealer Harlem had ever seen. Stay with me, because what happened next reveals something about power that most people never understand.
Let's rewind 6 hours. July 22nd, 1952, 8:47 p.m. Nicky sat in his mother's apartment on West 146th Street, loading bullets into the .38 he'd borrowed from a friend. His mother, Evelyn Barnes, was at church. She went to church every Tuesday night, prayed for her son, prayed for their neighborhood, prayed for a better life that never seemed to come. She didn't know what Nicky was planning. He'd kissed her forehead before she left, told her he loved her, and watched her walk down the stairs with the kind of heaviness that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. That's when someone knocked on the door. 3 knocks. Deliberate. The kind of knock that said whoever was on the other side wasn't asking permission, they were announcing arrival. Nicky tucked the gun into his waistband, moved to the door, looked through the peehole. A man he'd never seen before stood in the hallway. Older, maybe mid-40s, wearing a suit that cost more than Nicky's entire wardrobe. Gray fedora, eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice and weren't impressed either time. "Who are you?" Nicky called through the door. "Someone who knows what you're about to do," the man replied, "and someone who can tell you why you're going to fail." Nicky should have told him to leave, should have ignored him, waited until he left, then gone ahead with his plan. But something in that voice, the absolute certainty, the complete lack of fear, made him open the door. The woman walked in without being invited, looked around the small apartment, nodded to himself like he was confirming something he already knew. "My name is Ellsworth Johnson. Most people call me Bumpy. And you're Leroy Barnes, the kid who's about to throw his life away over $47 and a slap. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you think. Bumpy sat down in Evelyn's chair without asking. I know your father left when you were 6. I know you've been arrested 4 times, served time twice. I know you're smart, smarter than most kids your age, but you're angry, and anger makes smart men stupid. Ray put his hands on my mother. I know. I was there. Nicky's eyes narrowed. You saw it happen and did nothing? I saw it happen and waited to see what you would do. Bumpy pulled out a cigarette, lit it slowly. Because I've been watching you for 6 months, young brother. Ever since you started running packages for Freddie Mason. You're careful, you're quiet, and you don't talk too much. Those are good qualities, rare qualities. What do you want? I want to save your life. Bumpy leaned forward. You're planning to kill Ray tonight. I know because I would have done the same thing at your age. And you know what? You'll probably succeed. You'll catch him alone, you'll put 2 bullets in his chest, and he'll die in that alley behind the Savoy. Nicky didn't confirm or deny, just listened. But here's what happens next, Bumpy continued. Ray works for the Italians. Not directly, but close enough. He's protected. You kill him, and by tomorrow night, every enforcer from the Genovese family is looking for you. Your mother loses her son. And Ray, he's just as dead either way. Nothing changes except you're gone. So I'm supposed to do nothing? Let him disrespect my family? I didn't say that. Bumpy smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. I said killing him yourself is stupid. There are other ways to handle problems, ways that don't put targets on your back, ways that send messages without starting wars. What ways? It depends. Are you willing to learn, or are you so in love with the idea of revenge that you'd rather be dead and right than alive and smart? The question hung in the air between them. This was Nicky Barnes's real choice. Not the choice to kill Ray. That decision was already made the moment Ray touched his mother. This was a different choice. The choice between being another dead kid with a gun and becoming someone who understood power. Nicky looked at the weapon in his waistband, then back at Bumpy Johnson. Teach me, he said. And Bumpy did. For the next 3 hours, Nicky Barnes got an education that no school could provide. He explained how power really worked in Harlem, how the Italians controlled the drugs but needed black men to sell them, how the police were bought and paid for, how violence was a tool, not a solution, and had to be used precisely or it became a liability. And he explained exactly how to handle Ray. By midnight, Nicky had a new plan. By 2 a.m., he was standing in that alley waiting. But now, he wasn't alone.
Ray finished his cigarette, flicked it into the alley, and started walking towards 7th Avenue. That's when Nicky stepped out of the shadows. Ray. The older man stopped, turned slowly. When he saw Nicky, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The smile of a predator who just spotted prey that didn't know it was already dead. Little Leroy Barnes, Ray said. Heard you got out. Come to pay your mama's debt? Come to discuss it. Ray laughed. Nothing to discuss. $47 plus 2 weeks' interest makes it $65. You got my money? No. Then we got a problem. We got a bigger problem than money, Nicky said. His voice was steady. Bumpy had taught him that. Never let them hear fear. Never let them hear anger. Emotion is weakness. You put your hands on my mother. Ray's smile faded. Your mother had a smart mouth. I corrected her. That's business. That's disrespect. Boy, you better walk away before you get hurt. This was the moment Nicky had been preparing for all night, the moment where everything changed. But instead of pulling the gun, instead of shooting Ray Ray like he'd originally planned, Nicky did something unexpected. He smiled. "You're right," Nicky said. "I should walk away, because if I kill you tonight, I'm just another stupid kid who threw his life away. And you're not worth my life, Ray Ray. You're not worth a damn thing." Ray Ray's face twisted with confusion and rage. "What did you—" "But here's the thing about disrespect," Nicky continued, his voice dropping lower. "It has consequences. Maybe not tonight, maybe not from me, but consequences always come." That's when Bumpy Johnson stepped out of the shadows. Ray Ray's face went white. Everyone in Harlem knew Bumpy Johnson. Everyone knew that when Bumpy appeared, someone was about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. "Evening, Raymond," Bumpy said casually, like they'd just run into each other at church. "We need to talk about respect, about rules, about how this neighborhood works." "Mr. Johnson, I didn't know—" "Didn't know what? Didn't know that young Leroy here is under my protection now? Didn't know that touching his mother means you touched my family?" Ray Ray's hands started shaking. "It was just business. She owed money." "She didn't owe you anything. The debt you tried to collect was already paid. I checked. Which means you came to her house looking for an excuse to show power you don't actually have." Bumpy took a step closer. "And that makes you dangerous. Not to me, to yourself." "I'll apologize. I'll make it right." "You'll do more than that." Bumpy pulled out an envelope from his jacket, handed it to Ray Ray. "Inside that envelope is $500. Tomorrow morning, you're going to go to Evelyn Barnes's apartment. You're going to give her that money as an apology. You're going to tell her you made a mistake, and you're going to tell everyone on 125th Street that the Barnes family is off limits forever." Ray Ray opened the envelope, looked at the money, looked back at Bumpy with confusion. "Why would you—" Interrupted. "Because I'm teaching young Leroy here a lesson. Violence is easy. Anyone can pull a trigger. But power, real power, is making a man pay for disrespecting you and thank you for the privilege." He turned to Nicky. "Do you understand what I'm showing you?" Nicky nodded slowly. He understood perfectly. Bumpy had just made Ray Ray pay Nicky's mother $500, more than 10 times what Ray Ray claimed she owed, as an apology for his own disrespect. And Ray Ray couldn't refuse, because refusing meant making an enemy of Bumpy Johnson, which was a death sentence. This wasn't about the money. It was about establishing dominance without firing a shot. It was about making your enemy submit and pay for the privilege of staying alive. It was brilliant. "Now get out of here," Bumpy told Ray Ray, "and if I hear you even looked at that family wrong, we'll have a different kind of conversation." Ray Ray nodded quickly, turned, and practically ran out of the alley. When he was gone, Bumpy turned to Nicky. "You were ready to kill him. I saw it in your eyes." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because you taught me something better." Bumpy smiled, and for the first time it was a genuine smile, proud, almost paternal. "That's right. I taught you that respect without intelligence is just rage, and rage burns fast and dies young." He put a hand on Nicky's shoulder. "You've got potential, young brother, but potential means nothing without discipline, without patience, without understanding when to fight and when to think. I want to learn more. You will, but first you need to understand something important." Bumpy's expression grew serious. "What happened tonight, Ray Ray apologizing, giving your mother that money, spreading word that your family is protected, that only works because of my name, because of my reputation. You borrowed my power tonight." "I know. One day you'll need to build your own reputation, your own empire, your own respect." Bumpy lit another cigarette. "And when that day comes, you'll face a choice. You can use what I taught you to build something that lasts, or you can become just another violent man who dies young and poor."
Nicky looked at the alley where Ray Ray had been standing, where he'd almost committed murder, where he'd almost thrown his entire future away for a moment of satisfaction. "I'm gonna build an empire," Nicky said quietly, "and when I do, nobody will ever touch my family again, not because they're afraid of someone else, because they're afraid of me." Bumpy studied him for a long moment. "Good," he finally said. "Then your education begins tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." He walked away, disappearing into the Harlem night, leaving Nicky alone in the alley. But Nicky wasn't the same person who'd entered that alley 2 hours ago. He was still 19, still angry, still hungry, but now he was something else. He was Bumpy Johnson's student, and that education would transform him into one of the most powerful drug dealers Harlem had ever seen.
July 23, 1952, 9:14 a.m. Evelyn Barnes opened her apartment door to find Ray Ray standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking like a man who'd seen his own death and barely escaped it. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, his voice respectful in a way that made her immediately suspicious. "I came to apologize." He held out an envelope. Evelyn didn't take it. Apologize for what? "For my disrespect, for putting my hands on you, for claiming you owed money that you didn't owe." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong. This is to make it right. I don't want your money, Raymond. It's not my money." Ray Ray glanced down the hallway nervously, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "It's from someone who wants to ensure you're treated with the respect you deserve." Evelyn understood immediately. She'd lived in Harlem long enough to know how these things worked. Someone more powerful had gotten involved. Someone had made Ray Ray come here, hat in hand, carrying money as penance. She just didn't know it was her own son who'd arranged it. "Where's Leroy?" she asked. "I don't know, ma'am, but he's a good young man. You raised him right." Ray Ray set the envelope on the small table beside her door and left quickly, like he was afraid staying too long might change his luck. Evelyn picked up the envelope, opened it, counted the money twice because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. $500. More money than she'd seen in years. She walked into the apartment, sat down heavily in her chair, and said a prayer. Not a prayer of thanks, though she was grateful, but a prayer of worry. Because she knew her son, knew the anger that lived inside him, knew the darkness he'd inherited from his father. And she knew that whatever had happened last night to produce this envelope, her son had crossed a threshold he couldn't uncross. She was right. 6 months later, Nicky Barnes had become Bumpy Johnson's shadow. He watched, he listened, he learned. Bumpy taught him how to read people, how to spot lies, how to calculate risk, how to build networks, how to make the Italians need him without realizing they were becoming dependent. But more than anything, Bumpy taught him patience. "Everyone wants to be the king," Bumpy said one afternoon as they sat in a cafe on 135th Street. "But nobody wants to do the work of being king. They want the money, the respect, the fear, but they don't want to spend years building the foundation." "How long did it take you?" Nicky asked. 20 years before I had real power. Another 10 before that power became untouchable." Bumpy sipped his coffee. "You're smarter than I was at your age. You might do it in 15, but only if you don't rush. Only if you let the game come to you instead of forcing it." Nicky absorbed every word. He ran errands for Bumpy, small things at first, delivering messages, collecting payments, observing negotiations. But each task was a lesson. Each interaction taught him something about power, about timing, about the invisible rules that governed Harlem's underworld. And he never forgot the lesson from that night in the alley. Violence was a tool, not a solution. Real power was making your enemies pay for disrespecting you and thank you for letting them live. By early 1953, people noticed that Bumpy Johnson had taken on a protege. Young, smart, disciplined. The Barnes kid from West 146th Street who'd gone from petty thief to Bumpy's right hand in less than a year. Some people respected it, saw Nicky as Bumpy's successor. Others resented it, saw him as an upstart who hadn't earned his position. And a few people, dangerous people, saw him as a threat. One of those people was Frank Lucas. Frank was 22, 3 years older than Nicky, and already building his own reputation. He'd come up from North Carolina with nothing, survived by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone around him, and had caught the attention of some of the same Italian families that Bumpy worked with. Frank and Nicky had met exactly twice. Both times they circled each other like wolves, polite on the surface, calculating beneath. "You're Bumpy's boy," Frank had said during their second meeting. "I work with Bumpy," Nicky corrected. "Same thing," Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just remember, teachers don't live forever, and when Bumpy's gone, this neighborhood's going to need new leadership." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Frank leaned closer. "The question is whether you're going to be ready when that day comes, or whether someone else is going to take what you think you've earned." Nicky didn't respond. He just smiled, the same smile Bumpy had taught him, the smile that gave nothing away. But inside, he understood something important. Frank Lucas was right. One day Bumpy would be gone, and when that day came, Harlem would be a battlefield. The only question was who would win.
December 3rd, 1954. 2 years after that night in the alley, Nicky Barnes faced his second real test. A man named Curtis C. Note Williams had been skimming from one of Bumpy's operations. Not much, just a few $100s here and there, but enough to notice, enough to require a response. Bumpy called Nicky into his office at midnight. "Curtis has been stealing from us," Bumpy said without preamble. "I know, you know, he knows we know. The question is what we do about it." "We make an example of him," Nicky said immediately. "Show everyone what happens when you steal from us." "That's one option." Bumpy lit a cigarette. "What are the others?" Nicky thought carefully. This was a test. Everything with Bumpy was a test. "We could give him a chance to pay it back with interest." "Keep going." "We could demote him, take away his responsibilities, but keep him in the organization so he can't become a liability." "Or?" Nicky paused, thinking. Then it clicked. "Or we promote him." Bumpy smiled. "Explain." "Curtis is skimming because he thinks he's underpaid. He thinks he's worth more than we're giving him. So we promote him, give him more responsibility, more money, but also more oversight. We make him part of the inner circle where we can watch him closer, where stealing becomes harder, where loyalty becomes more valuable than theft. And if he keeps stealing, then we know where his loyalties lie and we handle him accordingly." The plan worked perfectly. Curtis accepted the deal, his brother joined the organization, Curtis never stole again and became one of Bumpy's most reliable men for the next decade. And Nicky learned another crucial lesson. The most powerful chains aren't made of metal. They're made of love, of family, of the things people won't risk losing.
But that lesson would come back to haunt him, because 20 years later, when Nicky Barnes had built his own empire, when he commanded the council and controlled millions of dollars in heroin distribution, when he'd become more powerful than Bumpy had ever been, the federal government used that exact same strategy against him. They arrested his family, they threatened his wife, they made him choose between his empire and the people he loved. And just like Curtis Williams, Nicky Barnes chose family. He became an informant. He testified against his own organization. He destroyed the council from the inside and spent the rest of his life in witness protection. The same lesson that had made him powerful became the weapon that destroyed him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's come back to that night in July 1952. The night 19-year-old Nicky Barnes stood in an alley with a gun, ready to throw his life away for revenge. The night Bumpy Johnson appeared and taught him a different way. That night changed everything. Not just for Nicky, but for Harlem. Because the lesson Bumpy taught wasn't just about power. It was about control, about patience, about understanding that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's intelligence combined with discipline. For the next 20 years, Nicky Barnes would use those lessons to build an empire that brought in over $1 million a day. He'd become so powerful that the New York Times put him on the cover with the headline, Mr. Untouchable. He'd survive assassination attempts, prison sentences, betrayals, and wars that claimed dozens of lives. But he never forgot that night in the alley. The night he chose education over revenge. The night he became Bumpy Johnson's student. And the night he learned that real power isn't about being feared, it's about being impossible to ignore. But here's what most people don't know. That first kill, the one that never happened, wasn't the last time Nicky Barnes stood in an alley with a gun deciding whether to pull the trigger. 3 years later, in 1955, he'd face that choice again. Same situation, same anger, same gun. But this time, Bumpy Johnson wouldn't be there to stop him. And what Nicky did in that moment would define his reputation for the next 2 decades. Did he pull the trigger? Did he walk away? Did he find another solution? If you want to know what happened that night, the night Nicky Barnes earned his reputation as one of Harlem's most ruthless operators, hit that subscribe button right now, because next week we're going deep into the story they tried to bury. The murder that everyone suspected Nicky committed, the one that was never solved, the one that even Bumpy Johnson looked at his protege differently. Drop a comment below. Would you have pulled the trigger that night in 1952, or would you have trusted Bumpy's plan? I want to know what you would have done. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Streets and Power Untold Moments, where we tell the stories they don't want you to know. Peace.